Hello mind mappers and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be going over The Essence of Success by one Earl Nightingale. Now, you are going to love this book if you're struggling with procrastination, if you're struggling with quitting before you achieve the results that you want to achieve. Earl has just a lot of great advice when it comes to seeing things through until you're able to be successful at whatever your endeavor might be. Now, Earl is a very high quality and highly driven person when it comes to personal development. He's one of the favorites of me and a lot of my friends who are very interested in personal development. A little bit more about him to get the video started off. He was originally the host of his own daily commentary radio program in Chicago. After retiring from radio at 35, he actually bought his own insurance company, and what ended up happening is after recording an inspirational speech known as The Strangest Secret for his staff, it later became a phenomenon, and he eventually built one of the largest personal development publishing companies, not only just of his time, but of all time. And he's responsible for bringing a lot of really great information to the market and helping some other people bring a lot of their really great information to the market as well. Now, what I've done here is pull out one of the best quotes that's going to give us an overarching view of what we're going to be learning here today from The Essence of Success. The quote goes like this: "It means asking the questions that are hard to answer. Where am I going? Why am I going there? What do I really want? And why do I want it? Am I gradually realizing my potential? Am I discovering my best talents and abilities and using them to their fullest? Am I living fully extended in my one chance at life on this earth? Am I really living? And who am I?" All really great, deep questions to ask yourself during meditation. These are the questions everyone must ask himself and answer. So the person who knows what he wants knows what he must become, and he then fixes his attention on the preparation and development of himself. As he grows towards the ideal he holds in his mind, he finds interest, zest, and joy on the journey. He looks forward to tomorrow, but he also enjoys today, for it is the tomorrow he looked forward to yesterday. He knows that if he cannot find meaning and value in the present, he will very likely be missing it in the future. Today is the future of 5 years ago, and are you enjoying it as much as you thought you would? Have you progressed to the point you wanted to reach? These are the questions that make us think. Now, I think every sentence in this beginning paragraph could be dissected, it could be expanded upon, and it could be pondered for quite some time. So I recommend that if you have the time to pause the video, look over each one of these sentences and just say, what does this sentence mean to me in my life right now? So one of the main things that I wanted to pull out of this book for you guys are, what are some of the questions that you're asking yourself? It's one of the easiest ways to tell where you're going. Are you asking yourself questions like, why did I do this? How could I let this happen? Or how could I do as little as possible? It's going to lead you in a certain direction, and I'm willing to bet that we can all guess that it's not the direction that we're going to be wanting to go. Or you're asking yourself questions like, what do I really want? What might my potential be? Or am I reaching my potential? Or any of the other questions that Earl's laid out for us here. If you show me the questions that you ask yourself, I'll show you where you're going. And this is really to say that should you change the questions you're asking, you would change the direction of your life. So it's kind of a feedback loop. It's not necessarily the questions I'm asking are going to dictate my future. It really is the way that I'm going to ask the questions is going to dictate my future, right? So I have the choice of the questions that I'm asking myself, so to speak. So try asking yourself some of the questions above. Take some real time. Maybe take the time to ponder, plan, and sketch out some of your answers and ideas when these questions are asked of yourself. And don't be afraid to revisit them. Why am I going there? It's a good question to revisit every single day. Where am I going? That's a good question to revisit every quarter, every year. It's important to ask these types of questions because, again, they're the things that are leading you. The questions that you're asking yourself are the things that are leading you towards your inevitable destiny, right? let's talk a little bit about mind mapping before we get into the rest of the book. You can get the most out of these mind maps simply by following along. I like to think of mind maps more of a meditation, a thinking process, more so than just distilling information. You can find the process of how I mind map plus 50 plus mind map templates of all the books I've done on the channel, all at the link down below. By following along, it's going to help you learn more, it's going to help you remember better, and hopefully it'll help you to apply these books to your life, which is really what we're all after all. Now, what I've done here is pull out more main points from the book. The two gray points that I have here are the two most important points for the book, so I recommend that you stay tuned all the way until at least the second gray point. The first point that we're going to talk about here is about demands. The quote that I pulled from the book goes like this: "Only a few exceptional persons make any serious demands of themselves. The great majority of us miss the far greater accomplishments of which we are capable, and the greater joy in living this would bring to us, because we quit and sit down, gasping at the first sign of fatigue." Now, this is something very interesting because I think, and we're going to continue on with the quote here, but I think this is probably true as much in personal development as it is in fitness. Now, as a personal trainer, a previous personal trainer, a previous boxer, I know that when people first get started, fatigue will basically make wimps of us all. And fatigue is very scary because you're afraid that it might last forever when you first get going. But along your journey, eventually you start to realize that fatigue is only the very first part of the process, right? Fatigue comes and it sets in, and eventually you kind of start to get your second wind. And that's what we're going to continue on to talk about here. The next time you get tired and you're doing something important, stay with it and see what happens. Each of us has tremendous second wind, mental and physical. Passing through the fatigue barrier to draw upon our idle reserves can make that difference between existing and really living. Now, as I was saying before, the difference between a brand new boxer and an older boxer is one, yes, the older boxer is likely in better shape. More experienced boxer, I should say, is likely in better shape. But what ends up happening is it's not necessarily how much better shape that more experienced boxer is in, but his ability to push through his fatigue, his willingness to continue to push through that fatigue. That's a very large part of cardio. That's a very large part of being able to continue on even when you're tired, is the mental aspect of it, not just the physical. Emerson said, continuing on with the quote, Emerson said, "Vigor is contagious, and whatever makes us either think or feel strongly adds to our power and enlarges our field of action." So the first thing, I want to pose a question to you here, as we were talking about questions before. Do you know that feeling of mental fatigue? It seems to be a mix between a headache, anxiety, and frustration. It's something that you feel maybe when you're reading a book, maybe when you're struggling with a large concept, maybe you're having a very challenging conversation. All of these kinds of feelings will start to set in, that headache, anxiety, frustration. I believe Cal Newport talks about it quite a lot in his book, Deep Work. When was the last time that you felt that feeling? And how did you react when it came up? Maybe you felt it at work. Maybe you felt it during a tough conversation with some friends. Maybe you felt it during one of your passion projects that you're working on. How did you react when it came up? If you're like the vast majority of people, and including me at different times in my life, you would give up as soon as you felt that headache. And what we really want to talk about here is not necessarily that the headache is going to go away or the anxiety, frustration, that feeling of mental fatigue is going to go away, but really what we want to talk about is getting comfortable with that feeling. And getting comfortable pushing through that feeling is very, very important. Because it's just like exercise. You're never going to get anywhere if you're afraid to feel the burn. And what is that burn? It's the place where most people stop. It's the place where your mind might tell you that that's enough. But what's on the other side? That's our second win. That's the place where the mind realizes that it must continue and it floods your system with new neurochemicals to make that possible. Now, our brains are really, really good at conserving energy. That's one of their main functions, is conserving energy. And that could be mental energy or it could be physical energy. So it makes a lot of sense that that same kind of result happens when we're trying to expend mental energy or physical energy. What ends up happening is we start to get these thoughts, these ideas in our head that say, that's enough. We could just stop for now. And they're all very, very convincing. And once we pass some of those, we start to get that headache, and it starts to really kind of get angry and kind of try to make us quit even harder and harder and harder. But the more we get comfortable and push through that, the more our body realizes that it's safe, the more the body realizes that what we're really trying to do is actually good for us, so it's worth the calories to expend it. So this is why taking on maybe big projects, again, reading complex ideas, and having challenging conversations is actually so important. When we take on these types of thought-provoking and fatigue-inducing tasks, we get a chance to push through the fatigue. Now, these tasks are working on both levels. We're working on potentially gaining more information, potentially creating something really great, but also we're training that fatigue-inducing muscle. We're training that muscle to move past that fatigue, which is so important and has such carryover in every area of our life. Just like exercise, the more you ask of your mind, the more often you're going to be able to achieve, Cal Newport talks a lot about this in Deep Work. Again, I recommend that you check out that mind map review I did on this channel. Our minds don't want to expend the calories these big projects or conversations might have. But eventually, over time, and with enough perseverance, we can train them not only to just tolerate that push, but actually crave and enjoy the push, because it's a very good feeling once you get past that and get into that kind of second wind and dip into that new kind of sea of neurochemicals that the brain will push out. Now, the final question of this point that I wanted to pose to you is, do you need some help with persevering? Do you want to, if you want to have a really deep and meaningful conversation, I recommend that you click the link down below to join me for a sample coaching call, where we'll dive deep into what it means to push through mental fatigue. If this is something that you're struggling with, this is one of the best ways that you can get over it. In fact, this for me was one of the best ways that I got acquainted with it. My personal coach pushed my mind into it through provoking and long-form mental stimulating conversations. Eventually, I became to enjoy and even crave that type of thinking, that type of conversation, and that's really what spurred on me creating these long-form mind maps that can be somewhat mentally taxing, not only to write, not only to read, but also to present to you guys. I've come to really enjoy all of this mental exercise that I get to do on a weekly basis for you. Our next point is about patience. And I said that this book is going to be perfect for a lot of you that are struggling with procrastination, struggling with quitting halfway through. This point is going to be perfect for all of you. But patience is not passive and should never be confused with idleness and phlegmatic insensibility. On the contrary, it is active and it is concentrated strength. It is perseverance. And it is knowing that to persevere is to prevail. I actually like the switch between patience and perseverance. I think that patience seems like we should just be idle and sitting. But again, as Earl says here, it's very important to know that it actually is perseverance. Even patience takes quite a lot of mental energy. Continuing on, he says that Aristotle wrote that patience is so like fortitude that she seems to either be her sister or her daughter. Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. A great life, a great home and a family, a great career, a great business, a great accomplishment of any kind, all these come with patience. Patience with others, with the world, and with ourselves. With ourselves is the one that I'm going to be focusing on the most in this mind map. It is said that every day begins a new year for each of us. If you're in the mood for a little self-improvement, for turning over a new leaf, write the word patience, someplace where you'll see it every day for the next, 50 or 60 years. You'll be amazed what this one word can do for your life. Now, Earl is very kind of a big fan of this. I know a lot of you are big fans of this, of putting things in your environment that are going to remind you and ground you back to a very important point. And I think that this is a perfect one to try it out with if you haven't gotten started. Just write patience on a sticky note by your computer, on the mirror in the morning, whatever you might do. Just write patience into it. There's so much difference between genuine patience and a sullen endurance, as there is between a smile of love and the malicious gnash of teeth. If your turn has not yet come, keep at it and be patient. So patience and perseverance are like next door neighbors, as he says. Aristotle says could be either her sister or her daughter. Often we think of patience being an inactive act, right? It's something that you're just sitting around in a waiting room or something like that. You're thinking standing in a line, or maybe you're sitting at work. But what patience really is to me is trust. And it's something that I've really spent a lot of time building in the past few months. Trust that the hard work I'm putting in right now will work out. Trust that somehow, some way, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And trust that if I keep persevering, I will eventually get what I set out for. Now, I don't know about you, but quite often when I set a goal or I kind of decide what I want to accomplish in something, that starts to become an expectation of myself pretty quick. And as soon as I start to get that expectation, I start to put judgments on myself based on how much work I've been doing, based on how far I am away from my goal, based on how much time this is going to take, or based on where I think I should be versus where I am right now. And all of these judgments really start robbing me of the ability to enjoy the process and the ability to actually have fun in the right now. And quite often, if you're struggling with quitting early, that's what's happening. You're really putting a lot of expectation, putting a lot of judgment on yourself, and because of that, you're robbing yourself of the fun of the moment. And when you're going to quit, it's because you can only put up with not having fun for so long. And eventually your mind and your body just start to wear out, and that's why you end up quitting. So I want you to think about this question. Again, this mind map is a lot about questions. When was the last time that you got upset about something that you thought was going to work out but didn't? What happened in your mind? Again, quite often when we set an expectation and it doesn't get met, we judge ourselves or blame the circumstances. That's two sides of the same coin. We're going to talk about circumstances next. This can cause a lot of mental struggle and is very, very tiring. If you have been able to step out of the judgments, if you've been able to step out of the expectations, you can see just how tiring they really are. Now, if you're still inside of judgment and expectation, I have a lot of empathy for you, because it was very hard for me to see how much mental energy I was spending on judgments on a day-to-day basis. But these judgments and this mental struggle can make it very hard to be patient, as it can require quite a lot of energy. So, expectations create judgments, and judgments make it very hard to be patient. So, what's the antidote to all of this? How do we get past expectations and judgments when that might be what has motivated us through our entire lives? A lot of us are just getting motivated by judgments that we place on ourselves. And again, if you can kind of step back and see the judgments that you're putting on yourself on a day-to-day basis, you'll see how much of your life and your motivation has been run just by judgments. Well, for me, what comes to mind here is just trust. Again, trust has been what has allowed me to kind of break free from these judgments to the extent that I've been able to. And trust in the process, specifically when it comes to goal setting, is what comes to mind. But that to me it's kind of a mix. It's a mix of forgetting about the outcome and then focusing mostly on the moment. Neither one is easy, but both of those are essential. And I think that trust makes them both possible. So if you can start to work on trusting the process, you can work on trusting some sort of a higher power, whatever it might be for you, it's going to make that kind of being in the moment and that non-expectation style of motivation easier for you, and that's going to give you that long-lasting ability to continue on no matter what might be happening. Now, next we're going to talk about circumstance. Might be a story that some of you have heard before, but two young boys were raised by an alcoholic father. As they grew older, they moved away from the broken home, each going his own way in the world. Several years later, they happened to be interviewed separately by a psychologist who was analyzing the effects of drunkenness on children in broken homes. His research revealed that the two young men were strikingly different from each other. One was clean living, teetotaler, The other was a hopeless drunk just like his father. The psychologist asked each of them why he developed the way that they did, and each gave the identical answer. What else would you expect when you had a father like mine? What else would you expect when you had a father like mine? Now, it's not our circumstances that determine our destiny, but it's how we react to those circumstances. And actually, a book that I just did a review on, Jocko's new field manual, it's his argument about nature versus nurture. I think he does a very good job of articulating what this means. He says that he doesn't believe in either of these two things. So nature would be, it's in our DNA, and nurture would be the environment that we grew up in is what caused us to be the way that we are. Instead, Jocko says it's all about choice. And I really love this. It's something that's been said so many times, but he makes it very, very simple in that book. I recommend that you go and check it out as well. So thinking that we're bound up by our particular circumstances leads us to stay in what we would call a victim mindset. Thinking, why did this happen to me? Or what else would you expect? It gives up control to our circumstances. So we no longer have a choice. We no longer have the ability to make the choice. Instead, we should be looking at, what do I want? And try to make the choices that are going to move us towards that. Now, we're not saying that nature and nurture potentially don't have any bearings on what might actually happen to us in our future and with our destiny, but what we are saying is that neither one of those two things can we change. The only thing that we can change is looking at what we want and trying to make the choices that end up moving us towards that thing. So instead of waiting for our destiny to appear, we should be working to manifest it as we desire and making choices to manifest that thing as we desire. That's very, very important. The next point that's going to be made here is about the fog. So according to the Bureau of Standards, a dense fog covering 7 city blocks to a depth of 100 feet is composed of something less than 1 glass of water. That is, all the fog covering 7 city blocks at a 100 feet depth could be, if it were all gotten together, held in a single drinking glass, and it would not quite fill it. And this would compare to our worries. If we can see into the future, and if we can see our problems in their true light, they wouldn't tend to blind us to the world, to living itself, but instead it could be relegated to the true size and place. And if all the things most people worry about were reduced to their true size, you could probably put them all into a glass of water too. Now, what a great analogy. Another question to pose to yourself. How big are your worries, fears, and your doubts? If yours are anything like mine, they tend to be big, dense, and all-encompassing. It could feel like a very thick fog covering all of your surroundings. They can sometimes feel debilitating, and they can even be debilitating if I give in to them too much. Sometimes I can let these worries, fears, and doubts cover up all of my surroundings. But as Earl says here, what are they really? Nothing but a glass of water dispersed across the sky around me. Now, what does this mean? I believe that what he's talking about is something that we all already know, that the human mind is built to make our problems, fears, and doubts big and scary simply just to keep us alive. It was very useful when we were cavemen. We wouldn't venture out into the dark or go over where the lions potentially were. But unfortunately, it's just not as impactful and useful for us nowadays, and our brains just haven't figured out a way to catch up. So how could we go about distilling our problems to just that single glass of water? Well, for me, meditation and mindfulness seem to be the great technique. Focusing your mind on how you breathe, on awareness, or maybe a metronome seems to allow you to start to clear the fog. It's almost like the more you focus on yourself, the more that fog is kind of drawn towards you and kind of distilled into the glass that you might be holding. Now, first, it will only be for a moment. In the moment that you're able to meditate, be mindful, that fog will start to clear. But after some practicing, and after doing this for a few years, it seems to just become a natural way of being. Somehow our normal state changes to something much more clear and calm, and when the fog does come, it's easier to clear it, and it's definitely coming less and less often. Now, our next point is another point on persistence. So we talked about patience, and persistence is coming up in this next one, right? So perseverance can accomplish anything. My friend W. Clement Stone tells the story of Tom, who was born without half of a right foot and only a stub of a right arm. As a boy, he wanted to engage in sports, as all the other boys did. He had a burning desire to play football, of all things. Because of that desire, his parents had an artificial foot made for him. It was made of wood. The wooden foot was encased in a special stubby football shoe. Hour after hour, day after day, he would practice kicking the football with his wooden foot. He would try and keep on trying to make field goals from greater and greater distances. He became so proficient that he was hired by the New Orleans Saints. Now, just offhand, what would you say the person's chances of playing professional football were if you were born without half of a right foot and with just a withered arm? Now, obviously, we would think 0%. There would be no way that this person could possibly be in the National Football League. But the screams of over 60,000 football fans would be heard through the entire United States when Tom Dempsey, with his crippled leg, kicked the longest field goal ever kicked in professional football game within the last 2 seconds of the game to give the Saints a winning score of 19-17 over the Detroit Lions. "We were beaten by a miracle," said Detroit coach Joseph Smith, but really they were beaten by perseverance. And this really is speaking to a pretty deep-rooted thing in society, that often what looks like luck, privilege, or a miracle is actually the byproduct of persistence. Nightingale gives us this amazing story of Tom, who by all accounts should never have been able to accomplish what he has. Now, what's one of the reasons that Nightingale gives us this story of Tom? Well, I think it's really just to give us permission. And what's it giving us permission for? It's showing us that anything is possible. And he just gives us the permission not to give up, to trust in the process, as we talked about before in the mind map. And now some of you might be thinking, why do we need permission? Why do we need this kind of a story to give us something to aim for, so to speak? Well, quite often, the world might tell us that things are impossible. I can only imagine how many people told Tom that what he was trying to do was impossible. And most of the things that they're saying are impossible really aren't. Just look around at all the amazing success stories in your life. Do you think those people never came up against some kind of adversity? And I mean, when you ask that question, of course they did. Of course they came up with all sorts of adversity that they may never talk about, all sorts of adversity that we may never hear about. But of course, they came up against quite a lot of adversity to be where they are today. But when most people would have quit, they simply continued. Those people were persistent. And why then do they explain it away as talent, luck, or even perhaps a miracle? Well, when we do this, or when society does this, it gives them the permission to not be persistent. It gives them a reason to let themselves off the hook. And as we talked about before, how difficult patience and persistence really can be. It's really a difficult thing to push through, and if you can give yourself some sort of a way out, so to speak, it makes life a heck of a lot easier. Now, the next one, this one really got me. This one really spoke to me. It's something that I've been kind of seeing around me quite a lot, about the people that you're surrounding yourself with and the way that you see the world. This is a really great quote. I'm happy that you stuck with me all the way until this one, and I hope you like it as much as I do. "What kind of folks live around here?" he asked. "Well, stranger," said the sodbuster, what kind of folks was there in the country you came from?" "Well, there was mostly low-down, lying, thieving, gossiping, backbiting, lot of people." After a few seconds of reflection, the sodbuster replied, "Well, I guess, stranger, that's about the kind of folks that you'll find around here." And the stranger had just about blended into the dusty gray cottonwoods, becoming a lump on the horizon, when another newcomer drove up. "What kind of folks live around here?" the stranger asked. And again the sodbuster replied, "Well, stranger, what kind of folks was there in the country where you came from?" That friendly stranger said with a smile, "Well, there was mostly a decent, hard-working, law-abiding, friendly lot of people. And again, the sodbuster said, "Well, I guess that's about the kind of folks that you can find around here." This really is another great story to just illustrate that our outer world is directly related to our inner world. Perhaps, in other words, what you see in the world is what the world actually is. Another couple of questions to ask yourself. How do you see the world? Do you see it as full of opportunity or filled with traps? How do you see the people around you? Do you see them full of love, respect, and with good intentions? Or full of greed, lying, and with bad intentions? Answering those questions will lead you directly to where you are right now. And really, it will lead you to your current financial circumstances, your current living arrangements, and your goals. It will lead you to the people around you, how they treat you, and how you treat them. So really, if you can work on your perception of the world, you can start to change the world around you. If you pay great attention to how you see the world, you can learn that that's the way that the world is going to appear. So it's very important to look at your own perceptions, look at your own judgments of the world and of the people around you. And once you can work on that, and once you can come up with a better perception, a better view of the world, your world will start to change right before your eyes. Now, the final point here is about dreamers. One day, a young man came to my office, and he told me he wanted very much to make a great success of himself. He asked if I could show him the secret. I told him to decide definitely upon what he considered success for him to be, and then to work at it for 12 to 16 hours a day until he achieved it. And when he wasn't working at it, to think about it. By doing this, he could reach his goal. However, to achieve success, he must force himself back on track every time he strayed off, realizing that failures are as necessary to success and as an excavation is to a basement. I never saw this young man again. I wonder if he took my advice. It is an unusual person whose desire is larger than his distaste for the work involved. Successful people are dreamers who have found a dream too exciting, too important to remain in the realm of fantasy. Day by day, hour by hour, they toil in the service of their dream until they can see it with their eyes and touch it with their hands. Successful people are dreamers who have found a dream too exciting. Now, I think all people are dreamers. Everyone has a dream for themselves and for their life. But again, he says that these people have found a dream too exciting, and they're willing to kind of toil until they are able to achieve that dream. And in the end, doesn't it all come back to patience and perseverance? Exactly what we talked about today. Both of which are definitely easier said than done. But in this excerpt, Nightingale gives us a good glance into how to make them a little bit easier. Now, going back to our previous point, I think trust is a very important aspect, but we're going to talk about something a little different here. Again, successful people are dreamers who have found a dream too exciting, too important to remain in the realm of fantasy. Now, this is what Napoleon Hill would call a burning desire. And again, when we talked about Tom in kicking the football, Earl actually called it a burning desire. And what I want to help you with here at the end of the mind map is maybe a step-by-step process of how you could work on cultivating that burning desire. From my experience, in very short summary, these are some of the steps that are going to help you along the way to cultivating that burning desire. Number one is to get out of your own way. Ask yourself this question: what do you really want? This isn't as easy as it might sound, right? A lot of the time people think that setting a goal is actually the easy part. But quite often we're blocked by maybe something that someone told us that we might want, something someone told us that we could get. We're quite often dissuaded by advertising. Often we're just blocked by what other people want for us. Instead, I recommend that you take some time to meditate on this. If you take the most time on step number one, you are going to set yourself up for success when it comes to cultivating this burning desire. Step number two is now to write it down in appealing language and as if it has already happened. This question would be, what would it be like if I already accomplished this thing? Now, don't just write it down in one sentence, and don't just write it down haphazardly on a piece of scrap paper or whatever it might be. Take 2 or 3 pages and write them down in every little detail. For me, I like to use mind maps for this. I have my own mind map set up about all of my goals, my burning desires, and I look at it every single morning. Maybe I'll do a video course on it if you guys are interested, because I do think that that is one of the amazing things that mind mapping is useful for, is setting goals and building up that burning desire. Now, step number 3 is to return to it every day and burn it into your mind. What good is a fire if you don't have anything to stoke it with? Every day we wake up and may have many competing demands for our attention. I suggest that you take a small part of that attention first thing in the morning and devote it to stoking the fire of your burning desire. Thanks so much for being with me here today. I hope you enjoyed this book as much as I did, and I hope to see you in the next video.